You know that thing you've been putting off, the message you haven't sent, the project you keep preparing for, the conversation you replay in your head but never actually have. It's not that you don't care, and it's not that you're lazy, and it's definitely not that you're incapable. So why do you keep not doing it? Because right before you act, your brain runs a quiet calculation. Effort, uncertainty, possible embarrassment, delayed reward, and then it gives you a conclusion that feels completely reasonable. Maybe not today. And the frustrating part is, it doesn't feel like self-sabotage. It feels logical. It feels like timing. And it feels like you're being smart. But that moment, that hesitation is where people stay stuck. And I know that because I'm in it too. Right now, I'm in Vietnam. I'm working, I'm building, I'm putting things out consistently. And there have been days where it has felt like nothing is happening. No traction, no clear feedback, just effort. And in those moments, this voice actually becomes louder. Maybe this isn't working. Maybe you should change direction. Maybe you're wasting your time. But what I'm learning in real time is that my brain isn't evaluating truth. It's evaluating cost. In this video, I'm going to show you 4 things. First, why familiarity can feel safer even when it's keeping you stuck. Second, how to tell the difference between useful discomfort and actual depletion. Third, how curiosity can help you move when you don't feel like it. And finally, I'll give you a simple way to take action before you feel ready. Because the goal isn't to force yourself through everything. It's to stop misreading what your brain is telling you. Welcome back to Becoming On Point. I'm Gabrielle Beth, a counselor and a performance coach. And this is something I work through every day, both with clients and in my own life. I see this pattern constantly. Capable people holding themselves back, not because they lack ability, but because their brain is trying to protect them from effort, uncertainty, or exposure. And I see it in myself too. Even with this channel, there are moments where it could be easier to wait, to overthink, to hold something back until it feels ready. But that's exactly why this matters so much, because when you learn how to move through this resistance, not by forcing it, but by understanding it, things start to shift. You stop second guessing every signal. You stop assuming discomfort means stop. And you start building confidence in a way that actually lasts. Dr. Gio Valiante recently discussed the idea that human beings often stop well before reaching their full capacity. He framed this using what is known as the central governor hypothesis, the idea that the brain can function as a protective regulator, applying the brakes before a person reaches an absolute physical limit. Now, this remains a debated model, particularly when people try to apply it beyond endurance exercise. Fatigue is influenced by multiple physiological and psychological systems, not one tiny security guard sitting inside your head with a clipboard. But the useful part of the metaphor is this. The feeling that tells you to stop is not always proof that you are incapable of something. Sometimes it is the information about the danger. Sometimes it is the information about fatigue. Sometimes it is simply your brain calculating that continuing will be expensive. And I felt that calculation very clearly. When I was building my work, especially in those very, very early phases, there were days where I'd sit down and write, research, or analyze case studies. And within minutes, my brain would start negotiating. This is too much, you're tired, come back to this later. And to be honest, I still do it sometimes. But objectively, I'm not incapable. I was just facing effort without immediate reward. Recent research suggests that mental effort really does carry an emotional cost. A major 2024 study, meta-analysis, examined 170 studies involving people in 29 countries. Overall, greater mental effort was strongly associated with more negative feelings. In other words, thinking hard often feels bad. That doesn't mean you are lazy. It doesn't mean you have chosen the wrong goal. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you should stop. Sometimes the unpleasantness is simply the subject price of exercising cognitive control. This matters because we often interpret the feeling incorrectly. We think, This feels difficult, so maybe I'm not meant for it. This is taking too much effort, so I must be doing something wrong. I don't feel confident, so I should wait. But discomfort isn't a conclusion, it's information, and you still have to decide what to do with it. When you avoid something difficult, you're usually not avoiding one thing. You're avoiding a combination of costs. There's the effort cost, this will take energy. The uncertainty cost, I don't know what will happen. There's the exposure costs. Other people may see me trying, failing, asking, changing, or wanting something. And then there's the delay cost. I have to pay now, but the reward may arrive much later. The last one, the delay cost, is the one that nearly broke me at one point. Because when you're working day in and day out, putting in hours, refining your thinking and building something from scratch, and nothing is coming back yet, no traction, no validation, your brain starts to question everything. I remember thinking, how long do I keep doing this before I admit it's not working? But what I didn't see at that time was that progress wasn't absent. It was just delayed. And eventually it did start to trickle through. And it still is. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough to realize that effort had been compounding quietly in the background. That is why a familiar but miserable situations can sometimes feel more tolerable than an unfamiliar opportunity. The familiar situation may hurt, but at least you know its shape. You know the characters. You know the script. You know roughly how disappointed you might be. Change introduces variables, and your brain cannot completely predict those variables. A recent review of anxiety through the lens of uncertainty learning argues that avoidance is not always driven by a clear expectation that something catastrophic will happen. It can also be driven by difficulty learning and choosing under uncertain conditions. Although this research concerns clinical anxiety, it offers a really useful, broader insight. Uncertainty itself can become something we organize our behavior around. So perhaps you are not clinging to your comfort zone. Perhaps you are clinging to your prediction zone. Even when the prediction is unpleasant, it feels manageable because it is known. This leads me to one of the more useful ideas in contemporary learning research. Your brain does not update simply because you tell it that everything will be okay. It updates when reality gives it information that its existing prediction could not fully explain. In exposure and extinction learning research, this is often discussed as expectancy violation. You predict a particular outcome, you enter the situation, something different happens, and that discrepancy creates an opportunity for new learning. I see this constantly in my work with clients. We'll map out a prediction, sometimes very detailed, very convincing, about how something will go, and then they test it, and the outcome isn't perfect, but it's also not what they feared. And this gap, that difference, is where everything starts to shift. Imagine that you want to speak publicly, but your prediction is, if I lose my words, everyone will realize I'm incompetent. You can repeat, I am a confident speaker, 700 times in your bathroom mirror. But the prediction remains largely untested. Then you speak. You stumble over a sentence. You take a breath. You continue. And nobody stands up and announces that your professional life has been cancelled. This is new data. The lesson is not necessarily nothing uncomfortable happened. The lesson may be something uncomfortable happened and I remained capable of responding. This is far more useful. You do not always have to remain in discomfort until you feel perfectly calm. The important thing is remaining engaged long enough to learn something that avoidance would have prevented you from learning. For everyday performance challenges, I call this the prediction to proof loop. Before doing the thing, identify the prediction. After doing it, compare the prediction with the outcome. Not how anxious was I, but what did I expect? What actually occurred? What was I able to do? That is how a difficult experience becomes a usable source of evidence, instead of merely becoming an ordeal you survived. This connects with an interesting disagreement between David Senra and Chris Williamson. Senra argues that belief comes before ability. You must believe something is possible before you are willing to pursue it. Williamson pushes back. His position is essentially, stop trying to manufacture enormous self-belief and generate evidence instead. He describes his own imposter syndrome as something that was eventually crushed by evidence. I think both positions contain part of the answer. You may need enough belief to begin, but you don't need complete belief. And evidence is what eventually makes belief more stable. You do not need to believe, I will definitely succeed. You may only need to believe, I can run one honest experiment. And this is exactly how I approach things with regards to my work, especially when I began pulling together real case studies, hypothesizing treatments, and putting my thinking out there. I didn't feel fully confident. I didn't feel ready, and I still don't, but I could run one experiment, then another, and over time, this builds something real. Confidence isn't something you think your way into. It's something that you build through evidence. You do one thing, you see what happens, you realize you can handle more than you thought. And that starts to change how you see yourself. But here is where a lot of do hard things culture goes slightly off the rails. It assumes that all discomfort transfers. Take cold showers, run until you hate existence, wake up at 4 a.m, eat your breakfast while standing on one leg in a snowstorm. Then somehow you will become courageous in every other area of your life. But recent experimental research found only limited evidence that rewarding people for choosing effortful tasks increased their later willingness to choose difficulty. Transfer to an unrelated task was mixed. This suggests an important principle. Do not merely practice hardship. Practice the form of discomfort that stands between you and the life you want. And I learned this the hard way. I could be incredibly disciplined in some areas, working long hours, pushing through fatigue, staying consistent even, but still avoiding the exact thing that actually mattered. The uncomfortable conversation, the visible output, the moment of exposure. A difficult workout may train physical persistence. It does not automatically train you to negotiate your salary. A cold shower may train your willingness to enter cold water, but it does not guarantee that you will have an honest conversation with your partner. If your problem is fear of visibility, practice visibility. If your problem is indecision, practice making bounded decisions. If your problem is perfectionism, practice completing and releasing imperfect work. If your problem is conflict avoidance, practice making clear and respectful requests. Call these specific brave reps. The reps should be difficult enough to generate new information, but contained enough that you can remain engaged. The question is not, what is the hardest possible thing I could force myself into right now to endure? It is, what is the smallest honest version of the exact courage my goal requires? Now for one of my favorite recent findings, a 2025 study tested whether curiosity could overcome people's tendency to avoid cognitively demanding work. When participants were not particularly curious, they tended to avoid the more effortful option. But when they genuinely wanted the information and effort was not necessary to obtain it, curiosity outweighed the effort avoidance. And this gives us a surprisingly practical intervention. When a difficult task feels like a referendum on your worth, turn it into a question. Instead of, can I prove I am good enough to make content? Ask, what happens if I publish 10 thoughtful videos and study which subject ideas people respond to? This shift alone changed a lot for me. Instead of, can I prove I am disciplined? Ask, what changes in my energy and concentration if I train 3 times a week for 1 month? Instead of, can I prove I'm good enough? Ask, what happens if I try this? And this shift has helped me so much. You're not trying to prove something. You're trying to understand something. And this makes it easier to act. We are often told that we need to find our purpose before we can work hard. But recent research suggests that the relationship can also run in the other direction. In 6 studies involving 2,883 participants, people generally perceived tasks as more meaningful when they had invested more effort in them. The relationship only continued up to a point. So this is not evidence that endless struggle produces endless meaning, but it does suggest that effort can help generate feelings of competence, value, and personal significance. Meaning is sometimes not the admission ticket. Sometimes it is the receipt. You may not feel deeply connected to the new career while completing the first uncomfortable course. You may not feel like an athlete during your first clumsy training session. You may not feel like a writer while starting a paragraph that refuses to behave. Part of the meaning may emerge because you return, because you contribute, because you become involved enough for the activity to begin carrying pieces of it into your history. Effort can increase meaning only up to a point. Exhaustion is not automatically noble. Pain is not automatically growth. And an activity being difficult does not make it valuable. The hard thing still needs to be connected to something you genuinely care about. Otherwise, you're not building character. You are simply becoming an extremely efficient version of yourself at having a bad time. This brings us to an essential distinction. Not every urge to stop should be ignored. In a 2022 study, participants completed either a high demand or low demand cognitive work task across approximately 1 day. The high demand group later showed a stronger preference for options involving less effort and more immediate rewards. Research also observed differences in glutamate measures, with the lateral prefrontal cortex, a region involved in cognitive control. This was one influential study, not a final explanation of every form of mental fatigue, but it supports something most of us recognize. After prolonged cognitive demand, expensive decisions become harder to make. And I felt that shift very clearly. There are days where I can think sharply, analyze deeply, and work through complex ideas. And then there are days where every simple decision feels disproportionately heavy. This isn't a character flaw, it's capacity. So push through can't be the only strategy. Sometimes the courageous decision is just to begin. Sometimes it is just to continue. And sometimes it is to recover properly so that you can return instead of turning one heroic day into 4 useless ones. Here is a practical dashboard. Green zone discomfort might include reluctance, uncertainty, self-consciousness, effort, elevated arousal, or the desire to procrastinate. You can usually proceed. Amber zone depletion might include repeatedly losing concentration, becoming impulsive, making careless errors, or reaching the point where you are no longer meaningfully engaging in the work. Here, we reduce the size of the rep, change the task, eat, sleep, move, recover, then return. The red zone information includes genuine danger, injury, severe physical symptoms, trauma flooding, or a situation that feels unsafe. And that is not the time to prove your toughness. Doing hard things requires discernment. Otherwise, determination becomes self-abandonment wearing gym clothes. Here's how to apply all of this. Pick one thing you've been avoiding, just one, then follow these steps. Step 1, name the prediction. If I do this, I think, and be specific, not it will be bad, try. I predict I will lose my words and people will think I'm incompetent. I predict they will say no, and I will feel humiliated for the rest of the week. I predict I will become overwhelmed and stop after 5 minutes. A vague fear cannot be tested properly. Step 2. Convert the verdict into an experiment. Ask, what am I trying to discover? What could this action teach me, even if the outcome is not what I want? This recruits curiosity instead of turning the action into a final judgment about your ability or worth. Step 3. Choose one specific brave step. Train this exact skill. Send one pitch, make one request, film one take, run one difficult interval. Have the first 5 minutes of the conversation. The rep should challenge the prediction without being so enormous that you can't remain present. And when your heart rate rises or your body feels activated, don't immediately conclude that something has gone wrong. Research on challenge and threat suggests people tend to perform better when they evaluate their coping resources as capable of meeting the demand. Brief stress reappraisal interventions also appear to produce small improvements in performance, although they are not magical solutions. So tell yourself something accurate. My body is mobilizing because this matters. I don't need to feel calm to perform. I have prepared. I have resources. I only need to complete this rep. Step 4, bank the evidence. Immediately afterwards, record. What did I predict? What happened? What was difficult? What did I handle? What will I change for the next rep? Do not only record whether you won, record whether you engaged. This matters because an imperfect outcome can still contain powerful mastery evidence. Perhaps they rejected your proposal, but you discovered you could tolerate asking. Perhaps the video performed badly, but you discovered you could publish without obsessively editing it for 3 more weeks. Perhaps the conversation was awkward, but you remained direct instead of disappearing into people-pleasing. Then schedule the next relevant rep. Not because repetition makes everything easy, but because repetition gives your brain more than one piece of evidence. One experience can be dismissed as an expectation. A pattern becomes harder to argue with. So here's what I want you to do. Not next week, not when you feel ready, today. Pick one thing you've been avoiding. Write down what you think will happen. Then do one small version of it. That's it. No big plan, no overthinking, just one action. Because the shift doesn't come from thinking about it more. It comes from seeing for yourself that the prediction isn't always right. And once you see that, even once, something changes. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. And you stop needing full confidence. You start trusting that you can handle what comes up. And that's where things actually start moving. So keep it simple. What is one action you can take next? Tell me in the comments below. Then go and do that one thing. And if you're tired of knowing what you need to do, but still feel stuck, you don't have to work through it alone. You can book an online counseling session with me through the link below. Let's work out what is getting in the way and help you take the next step.